It was August 14th, 1976, a heavy, humid night in Memphis. Inside the Mid-South Coliseum, the lights dimmed, and 17,000 people screamed as the brass section blasted the opening notes of C.C. Rider. Elvis strode onto the stage in his white Phoenix jumpsuit, rhinestones catching the light like 1,000 tiny suns. The king had returned home. From the first song, the energy was electric. Every move, every smile sent shockwaves through the crowd. But halfway through the set, during a short pause between Burning Love and You Gave Me a Mountain, someone caught Elvis's eye. In the second row, near the center aisle, sat a young woman who wasn't screaming or clapping like everyone else. She was still. Her hands clutched the edge of her seat, her eyes fixed on him, wet with tears. She looked about 19, dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail, a simple blue dress, no sign or poster in her hand. Just that look, as if the world had slowed to a single heartbeat. Elvis tilted his head slightly. He felt it, that strange, unspoken pull he sometimes got from the crowd. A sixth sense, he called it. "You can tell who needs you," he'd once said to Charlie Hodge backstage. "You can feel him even with the lights in your eyes." As the applause died down, Elvis wiped his forehead with a scarf and gave his famous half-smile. "Y'all doing all right out there tonight?" The audience roared back. "Good, good," he said, voice teasing. "I'm feeling pretty good myself, but there's somebody out there who looks like she might need a friend tonight." The crowd laughed softly, curious. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage, squinting toward the second row. "Yeah, you, honey, the young lady in the blue dress. Don't hide now, I see you." All at once the spotlight shifted. It landed directly on her. Angela Ruiz, 19, from a small town outside San Antonio. Her mouth fell open, disbelief washing over her. Thousands of people turned to stare. "Come on up here, sweetheart," Elvis said gently. "Let's make some memories." Security helped her through the barrier. She trembled as she approached, one hand over her mouth, the other clutching the program she'd folded earlier that evening. Elvis reached down, strong hand pulling her up as the crowd erupted in cheers. On stage, the noise seemed to fade. Elvis smiled, steadying her by the shoulders. "What's your name, honey?" "Angela," she whispered, barely audible. "Angela," he repeated warmly. "That's a beautiful name. Where you from?" "San Antonio," he grinned. "Texas girl, huh?" "I like Texas. Always good folks down there." The crowd cheered again. Elvis looked at her more closely. Her tears hadn't stopped. He lowered the mic, leaned closer. "You okay, darling?" Angela nodded, but her lips trembled. Then she did something unexpected. She leaned toward him, not for a kiss, not to scream, but to whisper something into his ear. The audience quieted, sensing something different. Elvis froze. Just for a second, his hand fell from her shoulder. The smile faded, replaced by something else. Recognition, maybe pain. He blinked hard, staring at her as if searching for the right words. The band waited. The room waited. Then Elvis leaned into the microphone again, his voice quieter now, a touch raw. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "this young lady's name is Angela Ruiz. She's from San Antonio." He looked at her, his eyes soft. "And she just told me something that, well, kinda hit me right here." He placed a hand over his heart. No one knew what she'd said. Not yet. But the air in the Coliseum had changed. The noise, the screams, even the heat seemed to vanish, replaced by something fragile, something sacred. Elvis reached out again, took her hand gently. "Honey, you mind staying up here with me for a song?" Angela nodded, her voice caught in her throat. He looked at the band. "Let's slow it down a bit." The musicians exchanged glances, uncertain but ready. The drummer raised his sticks, brushing the snare softly. The first notes of "LoveMeTender" drifted out like a sigh. Angela stood beside Elvis, shaking, eyes closed. He began to sing, but halfway through the first verse, he turned toward her and said quietly, "You got a beautiful soul, Angela. I can feel it from here." The audience melted into silence. Something extraordinary was happening, something no one there could quite understand yet. Later, long after the show, someone would play back the stage recording and catch the whisper the microphones barely caught. Angela's words trembling and small. "My brother Daniel. He died last month. He was 7. Your song helped him sleep." That one sentence would change the rest of the night and Elvis Presley forever. I was there that night in Memphis, and I can tell you, in the moment that whisper left her lips, everything changed. Elvis froze, one hand still holding the microphone, the other resting gently on Angela's shoulder. You could almost see the weight of her words land on him. Heavy, invisible, absolute. He didn't move. He didn't speak. The band waited, suspended mid-note, for maybe 10 seconds. The Mid-South Coliseum, and 17,000 people, was completely silent. No screams, no camera flashes, no sound but the soft hum of the amplifiers. Then, quietly, Elvis spoke. "Your brother Daniel, huh?" His voice cracked just slightly. 7 years old. Angela nodded, tears streaming down her face. Elvis looked out over the audience, eyes glistening in the stage lights. "Folks," he said, "this young lady just told me something I don't think I'll ever forget." He paused again, swallowing hard. You could tell he was fighting for control, the performer in him trying to stand tall, while the man beneath the rhinestones started to shake. He turned back to Angela. "Honey, you said my song helped him sleep?" "Yes," she whispered. "Love Me Tender." He called it the dream song. That did it. You could see the moment the wall broke. Elvis blinked fast, pressed his lips together, and for the first time that night he looked small, human. He set the microphone on the stand, stepped closer to her, and pulled Angela into a gentle embrace. The audience didn't cheer. They didn't dare. It was as if everyone there had suddenly remembered what silence felt like. Elvis kept one arm around her and said softly, almost to himself, "That's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever told me." The piano player, Glenn D. Hardinke, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. The rest of the band just waited, unsure if the show was even continuing. Then Elvis turned, took a deep breath, and spoke into the mic again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do something a little different right now. I want to sing that song for Daniel." A murmur rippled through the crowd. That mix of heartbreak and reverence you only hear at funerals and weddings. He motioned to the band. "Real soft, boys. No big show. Just soft." The lights dimmed. A single white spotlight fell across Elvis and Angela, who stood beside him clutching her folded program. The first notes of Love Me Tender echoed through the hall, slow, fragile like a heartbeat, fading into the dark. Elvis started singing, but this wasn't the Elvis of the records or the TV specials. This was a man stripped bare. His voice trembled on the low notes, broke on the high ones, and somewhere between the verses you could hear him sniff, quietly, trying to keep it together. "Love me tender, love me sweet, never let me go." Angela stood beside him, eyes closed. Halfway through, she began mouthing the words. Elvis noticed. He turned slightly toward her, giving her space, inviting her to sing. At first, her voice was barely there, a whisper on the air. But as the verse went on, she found her breath. Together, they sang the chorus, her young, trembling voice wrapping around his deeper tone like a thread around a scar. People in the audience began to cry. Men who'd fought in wars, women who'd followed Elvis since '56, all of them wiping their eyes in the dim light. And when the last chord rang out, Elvis didn't move. He just stood there, eyes closed, head bowed. The silence after that song lasted longer than the song itself. Then softly he spoke again. "I want to thank Angela for sharing her brother with us tonight. I think Daniel's hearing us somewhere." He looked up, squinting through the lights as if he could see past the rafters. "You know, folks, sometimes this job, this music thing, it feels bigger than we are. I've sung this song 1,000 times, but tonight it means something else. It means peace." The audience began to rise one by one, until the entire Coliseum was standing, but not clapping, not cheering, just standing. Elvis reached for Angela's hand. "Honey, I'll tell you what. You keep singing. You got something special in you." She smiled through her tears. "For Daniel," she said. "For Daniel," he echoed, and then he kissed her forehead. That was the first and only time I ever saw Elvis Presley cry on stage. Not the showman's tear, not the kind you fake for the crowd, but the real kind, the kind that comes from a place no spotlight can reach. When he finally walked off stage that night, he didn't head straight to his dressing room. He stopped just behind the curtain, wiped his face with the same scarf he'd used earlier, and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for letting me feel that." I remember looking down at the crowd, thousands of strangers holding each other, quiet, changed. No one had come expecting to witness something holy. But that's exactly what it felt like. And that was the moment the king became something more than an icon. That was the night he became a man again. Backstage smelled like hot lights and cold coffee. The show had ended with a soft wave of applause, rather than the usual explosion. People filed out like churchgoers after a vigil. You could feel it in the corridors of the Mid-South Coliseum, that hush that follows a storm. The band spoke in low voices. The wardrobe trunk stood open like a chest of silver shells. Someone killed the hallway radio. No one wanted noise. Elvis stepped through the curtain first, still holding the scarf he'd pressed to his eyes. He paused at the steel support beam, the spot he always touched like a ritual, and didn't move. Charlie Hodge came up slow. The way you approach a friend who's just walked through a fire. You all righty? Charlie asked. Elvis nodded, though the motion said maybe. He swallowed, smiled without teeth. Yeah, just needed to be the fella under the suit for a minute. Glendy Hardin set his chart on the amp and wiped his hands. Never heard the room that quiet, he said. Not once. It was like they were praying, James Burton added, leaning his telly against the case. I think we all were. Joe Esposito slipped in with a towel and a bottle of water. You got reporters waiting, local paper, 2 radio boys. I can stall 'em. He looked at the scarf, then at Elvis's face, and softened. For I can send 'em home. Elvis took the water, capped it without drinking. Give me a minute, he said. Maybe 2. He sat on the chair by the costume rack, the rhinestones dim now, just glass in the fluorescent. For a long breath he didn't speak, didn't even wipe the sweat from his jaw. You could hear the ice machine in the far room, and the whisper of a broom on concrete. Finally, he looked up. Where's the girl? He asked. Angela, Joe said. Security put her with the ushers like you asked. She's got folks with her, Elvis nodded. Bring her back if she's willing. Don't make it a scene. Joe disappeared down the corridor. Elvis stood and paced 3 steps and back. He pressed a palm to the piano's closed lid. Not to play, just to feel the wood. Then he did something I'd only seen twice before. He closed his eyes and breathed like a man keeping his balance on a high ledge. I sang that song 1,000 times, he said to nobody and all of us. Tonight it told me what it meant. Angela appeared in the doorway with Joe, still clutching the folded program. Under the bright backlights she looked even younger, a little stunned by rooms that smelled like cologne and electricity. Elvis straightened, then softened his shoulders like a father greeting a child who'd had a bad dream. Hey, honey, he said. You okay? She nodded, tears threatening again. I didn't want to ruin your show. Elvis shook his head. You didn't ruin nothing. You fixed it. He glanced toward the band. Fellas, give us a minute? They drifted away, leaving a respectful circle of quiet. What was his name again? Elvis asked, gentle as a nurse. Daniel, she said. He was 7. Elvis rolled the name in his mouth as if saying it right would help. Daniel. He reached into the wardrobe trunk and pulled out a clean white scarf. I want you to have this one. Not the other, and I cried in that one. This is for the walk you gotta do from here on. She reached for it, hands trembling. He called Love Me Tender the dream song, she said. Said the way you sang the first line made the room softer. Elvis smiled, small and real. I'm glad the room got softer for him. Sometimes the world's too loud for kids. He cleared his throat. Tell me something, Angela. You sing in church or school? A little, she said, almost apologizing. Mostly in the kitchen when Mama was cooking. Daniel would drum on the table. You sang fine tonight, Elvis said. You stood up there and told the truth. That's all singing is. Joe hovered by the door with a Polaroid. Elvis caught his eye. One picture, he said softly. Just for her, not for the paper. Joe nodded. They stood side by side, not like a celebrity and a fan, but like 2 people who'd shared a secret. The camera snapped. The white square hissed out and developed slowly. Ghost to outline to life. Elvis waved it once and handed it to her. For your mama, he said. Tell her I said Daniel's got the best seat in the house from now on. Angela laughed, a quick surprise sound that cut the heaviness like a ribbon. She'll say you need to eat more and sleep more. She'd be right, he said with that sideways grin. Then he grew solemn again. You did a brave thing tonight. So did you, she answered. He swallowed. Sometimes bravery is just standing still and letting yourself feel it. Joe cleared his throat from the doorway. Those reporters. Elvis glanced over. Yeah, he turned back to Angela. You headed back to Texas? Tomorrow, she said. We drove up. Daniel wanted to come last year. We couldn't make it. Elvis looked past her to a place only he could see. Well, he made it tonight. He touched the scarf in her hands, then the folded program. Keep singing, even if it's just in the kitchen. She nodded, tears and smile wrestling on the same face. Thank you, Mr. Presley. Elvis, he corrected gently. Just Elvis. When she left, the room didn't spring back to life. It deepened. The men came in quietly, like parishioners returning to their pews. Elvis rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand and set the empty water bottle on the piano. All right, he said to Joe. Send 'em in. The reporters were respectful, to their credit. They'd heard the murmurs, a girl, a song, the king in tears. One asked what changed the set. Another asked if Elvis had planned the moment. Elvis shook his head. Planning is for fireworks, he said. Tonight was a candle. They scribbled. A young radio man, nervous, asked, Does music still surprise you after all these years? Elvis didn't answer right away. He looked at the stage door, the seam of light along its edge, the place where the noise of the world got in. It surprises me, he said, when it decides to be a prayer. They left with their quotes and their soft faces, and the room emptied again. Elvis sat. Charlie perched on the flight case across from him. You want to run tomorrow's set? Charlie asked. Elvis nodded slowly. Yeah, we're going to make a space, Charlie. A space. In the middle somewhere, Elvis said, eyes fixed on nothing. I want one quiet song every night. Not the big finish, not the showboat. A place to sit down and mean it. For the folks that ain't with us. For the ones carrying something heavy. Charlie smiled. You already do that sometimes. Then we'll do it on purpose, Elvis answered. We'll tell him why. He stood, finally drinking from the bottle, 2 careful swallows like a man tasting water after a long walk. He slipped the damp scarf into the trunk, closed the lid gently, and rested his hand on it. Boys, he said to the empty room, to the ghosts, to us, we're going to leave some room for grace. On the way out, he stopped at the beam again. This time he didn't just touch it. He leaned his forehead against the cool metal and stayed there until his breath matched the hum of the building. Then he squared his shoulders and walked toward the door that led to the parking lot and the waiting night. Memphis, thick with crickets and the smell of cut grass, the kind of air you could almost sing. Behind him, the stage hands coiled cables and snapped latches. The piano sat with its lid closed like a book at the end of a chapter. Somewhere in the concrete maze, a janitor sang half a verse of Love Me Tender, off-key and perfect. I followed the line of fluorescence to the exit and looked back once. I don't know if legends age, but men do. And that night, for the first time in a long time, I saw a man who knew exactly why he'd been given a voice. Not to shatter arenas, to hold them. And by morning word would travel, not the gossip kind, but the kind people carry in both hands. A girl named Angela, a boy named Daniel, and a singer who let the song be bigger than the spotlight. A few weeks after that night in Memphis, the tour rolled on. Baton Rouge, Tulsa, Little Rock, city after city, the same hotels, the same thunder of applause. But everyone in the band said the same thing. Elvis had changed. He still smiled, still tossed scarves into the crowd, still joked with the front row. Yet between songs you could catch him staring out into the dark, as if listening for something only he could hear. The jokes got quieter, the pauses got longer, and every night about halfway through the show, he added a song he called the prayer spot. No spotlight tricks, no big band, just him, a stool, and the old Martin guitar. He'd say, "This one's for all the folks we can't see tonight, but we still carry." Then he'd close his eyes and sing Love Me Tender, the way he'd done that night with Angela. The audience never quite knew the story, but they felt it. The applause always came slow, almost careful, like hands meeting over water. Then one afternoon in September, back at Graceland, a letter arrived. It was addressed in neat handwriting on pale blue paper, the kind young women used for church thank yous. Joe Esposito brought it into the den where Elvis was half dozing on the couch, a gospel record humming in the background. "Fan mail," Joe said. "From Texas." Elvis took the envelope, smiled faintly. "From her?" Joe nodded. "Return address says Ruiz family, San Antonio." Elvis sat up, rubbed his face, and tore it open. The first line stopped him. "Dear Mr. Presley and or Elvis, like you told me. Mama says I should write and tell you what happened after the concert." He read in silence while Joe pretended not to watch. The words were small, careful. "When I got home, I told Mama everything. We played the tape you gave me on Daniel's old radio." Mama cried a little, but she smiled. She said you gave Daniel a better goodbye than she ever could. I took the scarf you gave me and hung it over his picture. Every morning the light hits it and it shines. Thank you for remembering his name." Elvis set the page on his knee, staring at the ink until it blurred. Joe spoke first. "You okay, boss?" "Yeah," Elvis whispered. "She wrote this part for you too, listen." He read aloud. "Please tell the men in your band that they played like angels. Daniel would have loved the guitar player with the hat. We all did." He smiled at that. A small, tired smile at the bottom of the page. "One more line. I started singing in church. First time I wasn't scared. Mama says Daniel helped me, but I think you did too." Elvis folded the letter carefully, like something breakable. "She's got a voice," he said. "I could tell." He slipped the letter into the Bible he kept on the coffee table, right between Psalms and Proverbs. Then he leaned back and closed his eyes. The record had reached the end, the stylus ticking in the final groove, but he didn't move to lift it. That night, he called Charlie and Glenn to the jungle room. "Got a favor to ask," he said. "Next session, we cut Love Me Tender again. Slower this time, real slow. I want a version a kid can fall asleep to." They looked at him. "For the album?" "For a promise," he said. A week later, they recorded it. No horns, no crowd, just piano, guitar, and that voice, gentler now, worn at the edges. The take ran longer than the original, almost 5 minutes. When the last note faded, Elvis didn't say a word. He just nodded once and left the room. A few days after, Joe mailed a small package to Texas, a cassette labeled "For Angela," Dream Song, 1976. No autograph, no letter. Just the music. Time passed. Christmas came and went. The Vegas date started again in the new year. On stage, Elvis carried the same ritual. One quiet song, one moment for those who couldn't be there. Sometimes he'd look up at the rafters and whisper, "For Daniel." The band never asked. They didn't need to. By spring, the audience had learned the pattern. When he set the mic back on the stand and sat down, the noise died on its own. It wasn't rehearsed. It was respect. A space for grace, like he'd promised, but behind that gentleness, something else was happening. He was getting tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes, but the kind that lives in the bones. He'd walk off stage slower, sit longer between encores, and every night after the house lights came up, he'd linger in the wings, as if waiting for a child's voice to call his name. People close to him said he prayed more. Sometimes out loud, sometimes not. "You gave me this voice," he'd say under his breath. "Help me use it right." One evening, Joe found him at the piano, writing in that slanted script of his. A verse, maybe a note. All it said was, "For every Daniel in the world, may the music find them first." He tore the page out, tucked it into the same Bible that held Angela's letter, and closed the cover gently. The next morning, the crew left for another tour stop. Before they pulled away, Elvis stood on the porch and watched the sun climb over the oaks. He whispered something none of us caught, maybe a prayer, maybe a thank you. Later, Joe said that was the last time he saw him look completely at peace, because in a life made of noise, the flashbulbs, the crowds, the endless shows, there had been that one quiet night in Memphis, and a letter that followed it home. Together, they reminded him of why he ever started singing in the first place, not for fame, not for fortune, for connection, for healing, for a little boy in Texas who slept to a song, and a girl brave enough to whisper that truth to the king. By the summer of 1977, the road had worn Elvis thin. His voice could still fill an arena, but his body lagged behind the sound. There were new doctors, new pills, the same schedules. The shows blurred together like one long night that never quite ended. But even through the exhaustion, he kept that one ritual, the quiet song in the middle. The band called it the Memphis moment. Every night, right after the lights dimmed, he'd sit down at the piano, take a breath, and say softly, "This one's for the ones we miss." He never explained it to the crowd. Didn't have to. Some nights he changed the song, "How Great Thou Art," softly as I leave you, "Love Me Tender," but the feeling was always the same. The hush, the stillness, the reminder that music could be more than sound. Charlie Hodge said later, that part of the show became his favorite. You could see it. His shoulders would drop, his eyes would close, and for 3 minutes he wasn't Elvis Presley. He was just a man singing to God, and maybe to one little boy named Daniel. Then in July, another letter came. this time addressed to the Colonel's office in Nashville. Joe found it in the pile and brought it straight to Graceland. It was from Angela Ruiz. The envelope was thicker, carefully sealed, the handwriting more confident. Inside was a short note and a photograph. "Dear Elvis, I wanted to thank you for the tape you sent. I played it at church." The pastor cried. "We started a small music group for kids at the hospital. We call it the Dream Song Choir. Every week we visit the children's ward and sing the songs Daniel loved. Your music helps them sleep. I think you'd like that. Love, Angela." The photograph showed 8 children sitting in a semicircle, holding tiny tambourines and toy guitars. In the middle, Angela knelt, smiling, the white scarf draped around her shoulders like a shawl. Elvis stared at that picture for a long time. Joe said he didn't speak for nearly 10 minutes. When he finally did, his voice was hoarse. "That's what it's for, Joe, that right there. All the lights, all the noise. That's just a bridge to this." He pinned the photo to the mirror in his dressing room, right beside the cross pendant Priscilla had once given him. That summer, he played his final tour dates. Indianapolis was the last. He looked pale, the jumpsuit heavier on him than it used to be. But when the time came for the quiet song, he smiled. He leaned into the mic and said, "Let's take a minute and send a little love out there, to the ones who need it most." Then he sang Unchained Melody. He played the piano himself, hands trembling, voice stretching but still golden. The crowd held its breath. Some said they could see tears in his eyes as he hit the final note. Maybe they imagined it. Maybe not. 2 weeks later, on August 16th, the world stopped. The headline said Elvis Presley dies at 42. The airwaves filled with the songs that had carried so many hearts for so many years. In San Antonio, Angela heard the news while folding laundry. She sat down on the floor and cried. Not the sharp kind of crying, but the deep, silent kind that comes when gratitude and grief hold hands. Then she stood, walked to the scarf hanging above Daniel's picture and touched the fabric. That night she wrote a new letter. "Dear Elvis, I hope you can hear this somewhere. The Dream Song Choir sang for you today." The kids didn't really understand why everyone was sad, but they sang anyway. "We sang Love Me Tender just like that night. Mama said maybe heaven is just a song that never ends. Thank you for giving us ours. She never sent it." She didn't need to. Years passed. The hospital choir grew, became a small foundation, the Dream Song Project, helping sick children find comfort through music. Angela kept every letter, every memory in a small cedar box under her bed. And once a year on August 16th, she and her mother would drive to Memphis. They'd stand outside the gates of Graceland with thousands of others, candles flickering like tiny stars, and they'd listen. When the crowd began to sing Love Me Tender, Angela would close her eyes and imagine that night again. The bright stage, the trembling hands, the moment when her voice met his and made something holy. I was there too that night in Memphis, and every time I hear that song now, I don't think about fame or legend. I think about connection, the way one whisper can turn into a wave that keeps moving long after both voices are gone, because that's what Elvis left behind. Not just records or posters or gold-plated trophies. He left spaces in people, quiet spaces filled with light and music and memory. And maybe that's why even after all these years, his songs still find us when we're tired or lost, or needing a reason to believe in something gentle again. I like to think that somewhere, the king is still sitting at a piano. No lights, no stage, just him and the music. Maybe a small boy named Daniel sits nearby, humming along. Maybe Angela's laughter drifts through the sound like wind through curtains. And maybe, just maybe, the song never really ended. It just kept playing, soft, endless, tender, in the place where love never runs out.